You know, as Christians, one of the things that you and I need to understand is, what is soul? The soul, what is it? There are so many myths and misunderstandings in Christendom and in the world about soul that it really behooves us to go to the scripture and find out exactly what soul is. Now, one of the things that we have to understand is that soul, the life force in the body, is in the category of spirit. Soul, if you will, is a kind of spirit. And it's important to understand that because as a kind of spirit, we can't test it. You can't take soul into a laboratory and find out what it is. You can't test for its presence. We can see its presence. For example, I have soul and I'm alive. If I ceased to have soul, my body would be here. I wouldn't have soul. I wouldn't have life. We'd call it dead. I'd be dead in the chair. Now the reason, I know this sounds funny or simple, but the reason that we have to get clear on this is if we're not clear on it, we will succumb to people's ideas and myths. Once we understand that soul is in the category of spirit and we can't test for it or examine it, then we have to ask ourselves the question, how do I find out about it? And the answer is from the Bible. If we're going to understand soul, we have to read and study it in the Bible. And we have to study it very carefully. And I'm going to tell you straight up, this is hard to do in English. It's hard to pick up any English Bible and study the subject of soul. Why? Well, for example, in the Hebrew text alone, in your Hebrew Old Testament, the word that's translated soul is nephesh, and it's used more than 680 times in the Old Testament. Think about the size of your Old Testament. Over 680 times the word soul appears, and it's translated more than 40 different ways. In the King James Version alone, the word nephesh, what you and I know as soul, is translated, and these are just a few: appetite, beast, body, breath, creature, dead, desire, ghost, heart, life, lust, man, mind, mortally, person, pleasure, self, soul, thing, and will. That's the word nephesh. It's translated all those different ways. So it's very hard to study soul in English. You have to really have a Hebrew concordance, which, by the way, thankfully they do now, both in English and, both in book form and in software form. And you can see all the usages. The Greek word psyche, which is soul, the life force in man in Greek, is also translated a few different ways, including soul, life, mind, and heart. Now, you and I know that even in English, when we say the word soul, we mean different things. For example, we can mean a person, like I was alone. There wasn't a soul with me, meaning there wasn't a person with me. We can use it as the animating principle. Without soul, the body is dead. We can use it as a moving and essential part, like the 12-cylinder engine is the soul of this sports coupe. We can use it as the quality that arouses emotion. That song had no soul at all. So even in English, the word soul is used in different ways. In Hebrew and Greek, soul has many meanings, which is why it's translated so many different ways. And some of these meanings include a person. For example, Exodus 1:5 is a good example. All the souls that came out of the loins of Jacob were 70 souls. And that's King James Version. We're soul. The word nephesh just refers to a person. It can refer to a living being, man or animal, your personality, the center of your feelings and emotions, or what we want to talk about today, the life force in the body of a man or animal. I should say that the soul is not a ghost. And this is so important to understand, and this is where we get into the mythology about the soul. is, for example, like people will believe, well, when you die, your soul leaves. It's like this ghost thing that somehow migrates out of your body. That's not true. That's not biblical. There are demons that impersonate people that come back into corporeal form, and you read about them in demonic books and that kind of thing, or you see them on movies. They're called ghosts, but that is not the soul of a person. The soul of a person who is dead is gone. It's dead. It doesn't exist anymore. Now, if we read the Bible, both man and animals have this animating life force, this soul. Interestingly enough, the Bible never says plants do. Mankind and animals have the same animating life force. Plants have an animating life force, but it's not named in the Bible. We just know the difference between a living plant and a dead plant, like we do the difference between a living animal and a dead animal. But in the Bible, the life force is named for men and animals, and it's called soul, nephesh. The life force in plants is never named. Now, it's not disputed that humans have a life force, have a soul, and there are many verses that talk about human beings having a soul. So I'm not going to talk about that. But what the Bible does say that is not as easily discerned is that nephesh, soul, is also in animals. And again, you'll want to see this in the Hebrew Concordance. But if you read Genesis chapter 1, verse 20, verse 21, verse 24, verse 30, these are pretty clear verses. If you look up the word nephesh, showing that animals have soul, let me read you one, Leviticus 24:18. Whoever takes an animal's life, which is nephesh or soul, whoever takes the soul of an animal, meaning you kill an animal, shall make it good, life for life, nephesh for nephesh, soul for soul. So man and animals both have soul, and it's important to understand that. Now then people might say, well, then why are men and animals different? Because man is created in the image of God. The soul isn't the image of God. It's the mankind that's created in the image of God. Our ability to think, our desires, our will, that kind of thing. Now, if soul is the life force, which it is, what I'm setting forth here from Scripture is soul, as we understand it, as the life force in man and animals. So soul is the life force in us, and as such, soul is in every part of us. You see, again, the mythology out there is soul is somehow like a ghost, that here I am as a person and I have a soul. And that soul, if I die, then it leaves, like a ghost would leave my body. There's no evidence for that in Scripture. No evidence for that in Scripture at all. Rather, soul is the life force inside my body. And the difference between a living person and a dead person is a soul. Well, now, when an animal dies, like for example, how many mice do you think died in the woods this year? Do you ask yourself, well, what happened to the life force in that animal? It just goes away. And there's a life force. The life force is not, it's not a singular unit in your body like a ghost that can move away. Rather, every part of your body is alive. And that's something that we need to get and understand. For example, my hair follicles are alive. If I pull out a hair and I look at that root of the hair, that's alive. Why is it alive? It's alive because it has a life force, and that life force is soul. This is something we really need to talk about and understand. So let's do that in part 2.